27 September 1944, The Hague, Netherlands. In the damp edge of the Haagsebos, a mobile mailer wagon creaks upright, and the A4 rocket takes its weight. The launch troop from Artillery Abteilung 485 works by checklist under blackout. Liquid oxygen hisses, alcohol, feed lines are bled, gyros are spun. An officer reads the firing table for the London solution that night. There will be no fighter cover, no flak screen to hide them, only wood speed, and the certainty that once the button is pressed, no Allied pilot can touch what climbs out of the trees. 8 September had already proven the weapon. Chiswick heard the first supersonic arrival before London understood the new threat. Now, the field routine has settled in. It is not a duel. It is a procedure. Set azimuth. Verify fuel temperature. Confirm guidance cutoff. Step back from the flame trench. The launch commander raises his arm. A 4 number on tonight's roster reaches thrust. The forest flashes white. The rocket clears the treetops in seconds and is gone, leaving only an orange column and a roar that rolls across tile roofs toward the coast. Same night, Southwark, London. Air raid precautions, wardens do not sound sirens. There is no time. The impact is the warning. A shock wave bowls dust out of Victorian brick, rattles shopfront glass, and leaves a crater the length of a terrace. There is no incoming track to follow, no contrails to read. Fire engines and rescue squads move on pre-assigned grids. A Royal Engineers officer begins a standard sequence cordon gas check crater measurement and a sketch that will later feed a plot of fall of shot. On a wall map at Air Defence of Great Britain, tonight's pins push the apparent aim point off-center. That is the first calculation that matters. October 1944, Antwerp, Belgium. The port is the Allied logistics heart for the Northwestern Front. German staff know it. After the Scheldt estuary is cleared, ships crowd the docks. American Transportation Corps stevedores lash cargo nets of 105 millimeters, shells and jerrycans to slings. British and Belgian crews jockey cranes between Liberty ships. When the first A4s aimed at Antwerp begin to land, there is shock, but there is no pause in the procedure. The Port Command has already issued dispersal orders, designated alternate marshalling yards, and drilled rapid track replacement. Rails will be cut, straightened, spiked, and tamped by dawn. At RAF Fighter Command, and in combined operations rooms labeled for crossbow tasks, radar tracks from coastal sets and sound-ranging reports are matched with aerial reconnaissance of Dutch launch belts around Wassenaar-Rijswijk and Hoek van Holland. Even if the missile cannot be intercepted in flight, the arc it carves into plotting boards points back to a grove, a road spur, a shed with heat stains on its roof. Bomber Command and 8th Air Force planners prepare night and day jobs against these signatures. Where a battery rolled out yesterday, a pattern of bomb craters will greet it tomorrow. German launch units feel the counter-pressure by November. Harassment sorties hit parks and convoy routes. Camouflage nets multiply. Crews rehearse shorter setup and teardown times. Orders from higher headquarters emphasize movement and dispersion. In late 1944, SS oversight of special projects tightens, and the A4 field force is told that Antwerp must be forced to its knees. Yet launch accuracy depends on fall of shot feedback. In Britain, MI5's double agent system and controlled press reporting bias what Berlin believes about where rockets land. For London, reports skew toward overshoot. For Antwerp, damage is recorded clinically, but relayed with delay, or framed in ways that offer no precise correction. What the German plotting rooms receive is a blurred mirror. Daily life at the docks adapts. When an A4 falls near a warehouse line, fire teams attack flame fronts while demolition crews strip dangerous masonry. A Royal Engineers bridging section, retasked for civil repair, slides prefabricated track panels into place across a crater that crosses a spur line. On the water, tugs respot ships to piers undamaged by blast. In the rail yards behind the port, American and British movement control officers push trains by timetable, not by hope. The standing order is simple: no single choke point, no single lifeline, and no days where nothing moves. In December 1944, as the Ardennes fighting surges, Antwerp's tempo increases rather than slows. The city absorbs tragic civilian casualties, but the port's planners widen dispersal radii and shift high-value stocks into hardened or deceptive storage. A 155 mm shell pallet that had sat under a timber roof now lives under mixed cover and is moved by a clock that no enemy observer can predict. If a crane cab is shattered, the yard already has the crew list and block swap plan to keep another cab turning. The measure is not heroic, it is industrial. Back in the launch belts, crews learn the Allied pattern as well. Aerial reconnaissance finds scorched fir trees. Bombers come. Trucks bog on wet sand tracks that yesterday were thought safe. A 4 operations command pushes batteries deeper into city edges where concealment is better but egress is tighter. The tally of launches remains high, but the pressure of Allied attention exacts a cost in fatigue and lost equipment. Intelligence summaries reaching German higher headquarters promise that aim has been refined, that Antwerp's vital points will feel the next week's storms. The next week comes. The port unloads cargo again by mid-morning after the night's blast. This is the shape of the campaign by early 1945 supersonic arrivals, unintercepted in air, answered on the ground by redundancy, deception, and repair. And on the map table, those plotted arcs keep pointing back to Dutch suburbs that grow more dangerous for every crew that lingers 2 minutes too long beside a mailer wagon. Early November, 1944, RAF Medmenham, Buckinghamshire. A photo interpreter slides a stereo pair of Dutch suburban tree lines under the viewer and rocks the images until the canopy lifts in 3D. There it is, a pale scorch ellipse cut into damp soil beside a straight line of firs and the faint wheel marks of a heavy trailer hooking back to a road spur. On the wall, red string already ties that grove to other ovals near Wassenaar and Rijswijk. The label on the board is simple, crossbow. The problem statement is harsher. You cannot touch a V-2 inches flight. You must kill its routine. London has learned to count without sirens. Antwerp has learned to unload, with craters still steaming a block away. Now Allied staffs pivot to a schedule war. In High Wycombe, Lieutenant James Doolittle's 8th Air Force planners assign medium formations to day raids on road nodes and suspected parks. At High Wycombe's cousin, across the Chilterns Bomber Command, under Air Chief Marshal Arthur Harris, marks night targets that photo interpreters have stamped as recurrent. 2nd Tactical Air Force prepares fighter-bomber alerts to pounce when reconnaissance or radar plots suggest another move into a known belt. Tempests and typhoons sit cockpits open at B-80 Volkel and B-70 Dern. They will never catch a missile, but they can maul the convoy that makes tomorrow's shot possible. Across the North Sea, the V-2 units adapt. Artillery Abteilung 485 and sister detachments drill faster setup on the Mailerwagen. The sequence remains checklist clean: raise the vehicle, swing the launch table, connect alcohol and liquid oxygen, spin gyros, align azimuth. But where the forest cleared yesterday, today they unlimber in the shadow of brick at the edge of The Hague's quiet streets where leafless trees cut aerial sight lines. The crews are competent, proud, and tired. They are also being watched by mathematics. British coastal radar paints ascent traces. Sound-ranging posts measure the clap and thunder to triangulate fall lines. Medmenham converts those traces into arrows pointing back to city edges whose every field change is recorded. Intelligence tightens the vice. The XX Committee, which already shepherds double agents feeding Berlin-controlled truth and calibrated lies, shapes damage narratives. Detailed fall-of-shot reports that would refine aim are delayed or blurred. Press coverage is clipped of specifics. The net effect is subtle but cumulative. German staff officers trying to tune their firing tables for Antwerp read a fogged mirror. Aiming error that should shrink with feedback instead drifts. The weapon remains terrifying, but guidance improvement stalls. Antwerp's answer is not bravery posters, it is method. U.S. Army Transportation Corps officers issue dispersal timetables to the minute. Royal Engineers detachments keep flat cars preloaded with prefabricated track panels. Belgian rail crews memorize a new rule: do not wait for perfect. Lay passable tonight and perfect tomorrow. When a blast shreds a crane cab on the Scheldt, a spare crew and a spare cab are standing by. If one yard loses power, a second yard assumes a pre-planned slice of the flow. Ammunition dumps reduce stack heights, widen the spacing, and mark alternates on maps that live in more than one office. The throughput figure, the Germans want to push down inches upward instead. The air war over the belts becomes a rhythm, a reconnaissance. Spitfire at high altitude streaks over the Hague between scudding clouds and returns with a thin strip of negatives. A Medmenham interpreter tags a new scorch. Within hours, a second TAF cab rank goes wheels up to work the surrounding lanes and copses. 8th Air Force mediums hammer road junctions that by themselves do not stop a battery, but will force it to take longer, rougher paths. At night, Lancaster crews read a Pathfinder glow seated near a park that 2 days ago held a launch. They plant a pattern that makes that address unattractive for a week. December 1944, Ardennes. The ground war explodes as German armor punches into the snowbound woods. Antwerp, which should have been throttled by missile terror, becomes even more vital. More ships appear. More trains are scheduled. The rocket crews are told to bend the port to force it to its knees, while the panzers seek a decision. Instead, the opposite happens at the quays. A Liberty ship that would have waited 4 hours for a berth is spotted in two. A yardmaster, who once would have run a long block of boxcars, now breaks the cut into smaller strings that can be rerouted around damage. The city bleeds, mourns, and keeps time. Inside the Dutch belts, counterpressure builds. Harassment strikes chip at convoys. A Tempest section rips up a column of fuel bowsers one afternoon on a canal road where a battery had grown comfortable. A night intruder catches muffled headlights sliding through a village whose church steeple shows fresh dust from the last daylight raid. Crews shorten their linger time around launch tables. They camouflage more. They sweat more. The tally of firing stays high because orders demand it and professional pride sustains it. But the machine that must move in place, fuel, fire, and vanish begins to leak minutes. Minutes are what Antwerp buys cargo with. London's adaptation is quieter, but just as real. ARP and fire services adopt a familiar cadence from the Blitz, modified for the fact that there is no siren lead-in and no contrails to guide the eye. Rescue ladders go up while dust still falls. Gas checks are automatic. Claims are logged in a standard format that feeds the same map boards every day at Air Defence of Great Britain. That record is not just an archive, it is the calibration source for the counterattack. Each plotted dot has two meanings, tonight's grief and tomorrow's target. By January 1945, German reports up the chain assert that aim has improved and that results in Antwerp will soon force Allied logistics to pause. January's numbers disagree. Tonnage across the quays rises. Inland depots absorb and push. The Allied advance slowed by winter, and the Ardennes crisis does not stop for lack of artillery, propellant, or rations. The rockets still fall. The strategic effect they promised does not appear. The physics never changed. A ballistic arc at supersonic speed could not be intercepted by wings or guns. The campaign did. Redundancy, deception, and rapid repair erased the leverage the weapon sought. The launch belts were not silenced, but their schedule met a larger schedule and lost. 5 December 1944, Antwerp, Belgium. Dawn pushes a gray lid over the Scheldt as the harbor whistle sounds and cranes begin their slow swing. Steam curls from tug stacks. A Liberty ship eases off a berth scuffed by last night's blast. On the quay, U.S. Army Transportation Corps officers read clipboards against a wind that smells of rope, coal, and cordite. A Royal Engineers section rolls up with flat cars preloaded with prefabricated track panels. Two Belgian foremen argue about a damaged gantry and then stop arguing because a fresh crew climbs the ladder with a new cab window in hand. The city aches, but the port keeps time. The Antwerp hub is not one building, one dock, one yard. It is a lattice. After 1st Canadian Army cleared the Scheldt in November, the Allied command poured muscle into that lattice. More piers opened, additional cranes, manned inland, rail cuts multiplied. Every vulnerable link received an alternate. If a V-2 tore a crater across a spur, a work train arrived with sleepers, rails, spikes, and a crew train to lay passable in hours and perfect by tomorrow. If a warehouse lost its roof, stock shifted to a grid of smaller stores whose addresses could swap by prearranged order without a meeting or a flourish. The Germans aimed for choke points. Planners worked to erase the idea of a choke point at all. At 0810, a blast mark from the night glows through morning frost in a yard behind the quays. ARP squads finish their sweep, gas checks, complete void spaces searched, fire breaks cut. A Royal Engineers lieutenant ticks boxes on a form that looks dull because it is supposed to. His report joins a stack headed to movement control. Those forms feed a scheduling map that does not care about speeches. It only cares about how many trains can be made up by 1000, which strings can be rerouted around the whole, and which consignments of 105 millimeters, shell aviation, gasoline, and canned rations must move today or they will be a problem. For infantry tomorrow in the Ardennes. On the river, a tug noses a freighter with a split schedule into a berth that was not its berth last week. The pilot knows the new pattern because the pattern changes by design. Dispersal is not a panic response. It is the daily plan. Pallets are smaller stacks, lower aisles, wider. Forklifts and slings chase a target called dwell time that the German staff wants to lengthen and the port office insists on shortening. Every figure on the board tells the same quiet story. The more you spread and shuffle and pre-build alternates, the less any single hit can do. The rocket crews in the Netherlands cannot see this board. What they can hear are orders. Antwerp must be bent. Antwerp must be forced to its knees. Their checklist remains clean and professional. Raise the Mielerwagen. Align azimuth. Spin the gyros. Fuel the tanks. Fire. Move. But aim correction needs accurate fall of shot. In British hands, the double-cross system and controlled press blur the picture the crews need to sharpen. Claims of crippling hits reach German headquarters. The internal port figures do not match those claims. Tonnage rises through pain. The schedule war stays a schedule war. Midday, a U.S. Army quartermaster captain walks a platform edge with a pencil stub, ticking car numbers into a pad as a locomotive coughs and a string of boxcars begins to move. He will not remember his own steps, but the numbers he writes and the decisions they drive matter in ways a speech cannot. A depot west of town flashes that it can absorb 2 extra cuts of ammunition because a different depot took a blast last night and must hold empty aisles while crews sweep shards out of rafters. A signalman throws a switch. A convoy on the Brussels road gets a revised time to clear a bridge because the bridge is not in the same role it was yesterday. The weapon was built for single targets of high value. The port was rebuilt to be many small targets with high resilience. Night again. Sirens did not lead the day, and they will not lead the night. A 4S will arrive on their own schedule with their own hard physics. But the answer remains the same. A ledger, a map, a grid of alternates and crews who measure success by whether cranes keep turning in the hour after the dust settles. The pattern has a cruel grace. Civilians bleed. Families mourn. The quays keep pulling cargo off ships and pushing it inland. In the Ardennes, American units will soon need everything Antwerp can send, and the port's reply is a number, not a promise. Trains per day, tons per hour. By January 1945, the cadence has hardened into muscle memory. Movement control posts the next day plan each afternoon and a last-minute revision each midnight. The revision is not a confession of chaos. It is the method that denies an enemy pattern. Where a V-2 falls tomorrow's plan, already knows how not to pass there with anything that cannot be delayed. Where a road junction grows risky, a different junction gets the weight. The Allied advance, west of the Rhine, will slow for winter and terrain, but it will not stall for shells or gasoline because a ballistic arc happened to land near a crane. In Antwerp's yard office, a chalkboard shows 3 columns, now, next, elsewhere. The rule is simple. When now breaks, next moves into now, and elsewhere becomes next. The board erases the illusion that one blow can paralyze a web designed to root around damage in hours. That board is the quiet reason German promises about Antwerp keep dissolving when they meet the day after. Late November, 1944 London. In a smoke-thin room off Whitehall, the XX committee reviews the morning's traffic from controlled agents. The entries are clipped, factual, and calibrated. An agent who has long reported on bomb damage now notes a strike that appeared well east of docks, another that seemed short of the rail yards. The phrasing is deliberate. When these lines travel through German channels, they will be read against firing tables on desks in the Netherlands. The intent is not to boast or to taunt. The intent is to blur the mirror the rocket crews use to correct aim. The V-2 campaign is a physics problem, married to a schedule, but it is also an intelligence contest. British coastal radar picks up ascent traces. Sound-ranging arrays log detonations. Royal engineers plot craters to the yard. Those numbers are clean. The numbers the Germans receive are not. Press reports are stripped of coordinates and angles. Police and civil defense logs feed central boards, but their public versions are sanded smooth. A feedback loop that should sharpen impact patterns is made to wander. In German plotting rooms, officers believe they are closing on Antwerp's most sensitive nodes. On Antwerp's boards, throughput rises through pain. December 1944. The Hague. A launch troop from Artillerie-Abteilung. 485 rehearses. Again, what is already muscle memory. Raise the Mailerwagen. Secure the tail. Align azimuth. Fuel alcohol. Cool liquid oxygen lines. Spin gyros. Verify cutoff and pitch program. Fire. Move. They have shifted closer to brick and tram wires using city edges to break the line of sight from the air. Their setup times shrink. Their pride is evident. Their losses rise anyway. Allied harassment builds, roads are cratered, and fuel bozers burn where typhoons catch them on a canal road. The crews are not beaten. They are being hurried by a clock they do not control. Across the North Sea, RAF Medmenham photo interpreters pivot from the look of forest scorch to the subtler signatures of urban edge use, a heat-dulled roof where there should be frost, parallel wheel marks in a park that yesterday showed only footpaths, a shed whose shadow length does not match its neighbors because a blast vent has been cut into its far side. Each clue feeds a crossbow target folder. 2nd Tactical Air Force stands up fighter-bomber patrols that do not wait for perfect confirmation. They fly when the pattern suggests a convoy is moving, because delay is the ally of a weapon that needs only minutes under a net. Antwerp's counter is methodical. Movement control circulates a daily deception of its own variable start times, alternate berths, pre-planned route swaps. The docks learn to live in version control. A train's consist can be cut into smaller blocks in minutes. A crane can be walked to an unfamiliar pier because every operator has rehearsed that walk. Yardmasters keep 3 switching plans on the chalkboard. Now next elsewhere. When an impact tears up, now next slides in, and elsewhere becomes next. The German staff wants the single crippling hit. The port denies the idea that a single hit exists. January 1945 British home counties. Air Defence of Great Britain compiles a month's fall of shot for both London and Antwerp. The pins drift, but not toward the nodes the Germans think they have pinned down. Civilian casualties remain severe. Material damage is real. The curve that matters to the Allied advance keeps bending upward. The port's tonnage rises. Rail dispatch increases. Inland depots show stock levels that support winter fighting and the coming push to the Rhine. In the Netherlands, reports up the German chain assert improved results. The numbers those reports seek to change refuse to move in the direction promised. Inside the belts, German countermeasures multiply. Crews paint new nets, drill shorter, linger times, and push for night moves under blackout. They are told that Antwerp must pause. They can feel that Antwerp has not paused. Every time a convoy is forced around a cratered junction, every time a fuel truck is left smoking in a ditch, minutes bleed. Those minutes do not show up on a propaganda poster. They show up in a port that still unloads at dawn. The British code name for the V-2 is Big Ben, and the operational tag for the Hunt is Crossbow. Neither name changes the reality that the missile cannot be intercepted in air. The answer is to choke its routine and to fog its vision. Photo interpretation, fighter-bomber harassment, and strategic bombing of road nodes make the routine harder. Double-agent narratives and controlled publicity make the vision worse. When the two are joined, the result is not a dramatic kill on camera. The result is a slow failure to achieve what the weapons staff papers promised. February 1945, Antwerp. A work train rattles over a panel laid last night across a blast-cut scar. On the quay, a quartermaster captain marks another column of boxcars as ready. The chalkboard in movement control flips 3 lines, and an arrow links 2 yards that were not supposed to be linked yesterday. It is not courage that beats the missile. Courage was spent early. It is procedure redundancy and a refusal to give the enemy a fixed shape to hit. The rocket arrives. The dock moves. The rail shifts. The depot absorbs. The front receives. March will bring the end of impacts on Britain, with the last strike falling on 27 March 1945. In the Netherlands, launch sites are overrun or abandoned. The German field force that served the A4 remains competent in defeat. The Allied system that met it remains impersonal in victory. On paper, a supersonic ballistic weapon should have forced Antwerp to its knees. In practice, Antwerp learned to stand on many legs. 18 February, 1945. The Hague, Netherlands. A launch convoy noses through damp streets before dawn, muffled headlamps, cutting short cones of light across tram rails. The Miller wagon rides behind a tractor that growls at idle, while a security detail checks corners where brick row houses open into small parks. The crew leader flips a clipboard to the same checklist he has carried since autumn. Raise, align, fuel, chill lines, spin gyros, verify cutoff, fire, move. He has heard that Antwerp is faltering. He believes it because he must. He has not seen Antwerp since 1940. Across the North Sea at RAF Medmenham, a photo interpreter rocks a stereo pair and traces a tight web of wheel marks where there should be only footpaths. A heat-dulled roof tells him last night's fuel trailers idled nearby. The target folder grows by one more annotated image and a thin pencil arrow that points to a road spur on the edge of a neighborhood in The Hague. At 2nd Tactical Air Force fields on the continent, Tempest pilots sit on readiness. They will not catch a missile. They will make a schedule hurt. 19 February, Antwerp. Snow grit turns to gray slush between rails as a work train clatters over a panel that was not there yesterday. Movement Control has rewritten the morning board twice since midnight. The first revision diverted a cut of 105mm shell to a different yard, while ARP crews cleared a blast-sprung roof. The second pulled 2 strings of rations around a spur line that is technically passable but not fast. A U.S. Army Transportation Corps captain ticks car numbers into a pad. A Belgian yardmaster shouts, then laughs, then waves, as a crane operator swings a load to an improvised berth 3 piers down. Nothing about the scene looks calm. Everything about the numbers says the port is winning. At High Wycombe 8th Air Force, planners read the Medmenham notes, suspected road nodes near Rijswijk and Wassenaar, repeated scorch in a suburban cops convoy, signatures along a canal road. Medium bombers get a daylight tasking. Bomber Command marks a night job for a patch of tree line that has shown 3 scorch ellipses in 6 days. None of these strikes will catch a rocket in flight. All of them will hit the routine that puts a rocket under a net by sundown. The launch troop in The Hague has shortened its linger time to a handful of minutes. Nets know their hooks. Fuel couplings find their seats by touch. Gloves are stiff with the residue of nights like this. Orders from higher headquarters insist Antwerp must pause. The men believe it when the flame lights the trees and the rocket goes. They also believe in the clock on the dashboard that tells them how late they are getting back to the dispersal barn. When a typhoon section rakes a canal road 2 afternoons later and leaves a fuel bowser burning on its side, belief tightens into a knot that rides everywhere in the gut. 22 February, London. In a narrow room off Whitehall, the XX committee reads morning traffic and makes small edits that will loom large when they cross the lines. A controlled agent notes apparent impacts short of rail yards and east of dock lines. The phrasing is a dimmer switch, not a switchblade. The goal is drift, not drama. In British plotting rooms, pins land where they truly fell. In German plotting rooms, pins land where they are allowed to be believed. Firing tables that should be tightening stay soft. Antwerp's answer continues to be arithmetic done in public view. The chalkboard in the yard office shows now next elsewhere. The quay boss points at a column called elsewhere and moves his finger into now. A pilot boat slides a freighter into a berth that was not built for that class. A team swaps a crane cab window in 10 minutes with a part pulled from a locker that was stocked last week because the stock list said it was time. A Liberty ship casts off on a schedule that is 2 hours earlier than last month because the average dwell time dropped under blast pressure, not in spite of it. 1 March 1945, The Hague. A launch set glows white, and the rocket leaps. The crew collapses the table and drives. They pass a corner where a church steeple shows fresh dust from a night attack. In the convoy commander's lap, a report pad carries figures that will travel up chain. The numbers promise improved aim. The last page promises results that will force Antwerp to bow. He does not write what he suspects that Antwerp does not bow, it bends and springs back. Antwerp bends again that night. A crater splits a spur. A Royal Engineers team lays panels, spikes, and ballast by lantern and headlamp, while an ARP crew hoses a smoldering timber stack. Movement Control slides 3 magnets on a board and redraws the cut list. A quartermaster captain scratches out 2 car numbers and writes 2 more from a different string. The yard loses an hour. The front will not feel it. Mid-March. Reports in German staffs continue to claim that Antwerp is throttled. The tonnage numbers across the quays continue to rise. Inland depots report stock levels that carry the fight through the Rhineland and toward the Rhine crossings. The Allied tempo falters only where weather and terrain insist. It does not falter where a ballistic arc meets a crane. The weapon remains terrifying. The port remains scheduled. 27 March, 1945. Britain. The last V-2 to strike British soil lands and breaks a quiet street. The map pin goes in. The board that has tracked months of grief shows a final dot. In the Netherlands, some launch gear is still mobile, but Allied ground thrusts and air pressure have made the belts thin, ragged, and late. The German field force that served the A4 remains professional in its routine. The Allied system that met it remains impersonal in its reply. One promised paralysis. The other printed timetables. The physics did not change. Supersonic impact could not be intercepted by fighters or guns. What changed was leverage. Blinded aim and a hunted routine met redundancy, dispersal, and repair. The rocket spoke in shock. The port answered in numbers. Early April 1945, South Beveland and Walcheren approaches. Low clouds scud in from the North Sea as Canadian patrols nose across flat polders where months earlier trucks had threaded between copses to hide mailer wagon and fuel bozers. A farmhouse loft holds a tangle of cable spools and a stencil that once read A4. A ditch glints with beads of frozen alcohol spilled in haste. The belts are not gone. They are emptying. Road verges show chain scars where launch tables were dragged away in the night. In the mud behind a hedgerow, a crew left a heat-buckled vent panel they could not lift. The war is moving past the missile. At RAF, Medmenham interpreters pin the newest sorties to a wall already thick with arrows. Fresh negatives show fewer scorch ellipses and more wheel marks headed east. Second Tactical Air Force files confirm the same story from the air convoys that once hugged suburban parks in The Hague, now thread farther inland, taking longer detours around roads cut by medium bombers and fighter bombers. The hunt has not stopped the weapon. It has starved the schedule. Antwerp's yard offices treat April like February, and that is the point. Movement Control revises boards at midnight and at dawn. AU.S. Army Transportation Corps captain writes car numbers, while a Royal Engineers lieutenant signs off another quick panel lay across a fresh scar in a spur. Belgian yardmasters trade berths without complaint. They have traded them every week since November. A chalk arrow slides from elsewhere to now, and the keys hum. Inland depots report stock sufficient to carry operations in the Rhineland and toward the Rhine crossings. The numbers are not pretty. They are steady. The Hague, mid-April. A launch troop limps home past tram wires under blackout. A typhoon section has visited the canal road twice in a week, and the fuel trucks are fewer. Orders from higher headquarters still say Antwerp must be forced down. Men who were taught to believe in arithmetic now believe in habit, because habit is all that remains. They fire when they can. They move when they must. The time they need keeps shrinking. The time Antwerp needs keeps appearing. In London, the XX committee continues to trim reports into phrases that dim, not blind. A controlled agent notes impacts that appeared east of docks and short of marshalling yards. In air defense of Great Britain, the internal pins remain exact. The public story remains vague. A feedback loop that should have hardened German aim arrives soft again. Guidance drift remains guidance drift. It is not a camera flash victory. It is a long denial. 21 April, 1945. Antwerp. A Liberty ship clears with a wake that slaps a quay wall, still white with fresh mortar. A crane whose cab window had been replaced in December now carries a second spare pane bolted on the rack behind the operator's head because lessons learned became stock lists. A Belgian foreman shrugs at a schedule change and waves a locomotive through a throat that was not the designated throat last week. The board in the yard office keeps its 3 columns, now next elsewhere. The columns keep winning. End of March had already written a line in London, the last V-2 strike on British soil, on 27 March 1945. April writes a different line in the Netherlands. Allied ground thrusts and air pressure turn launch belts into retreat lanes. Equipment that cannot be moved is burned. Equipment that can be moved moves too slowly for the tempo of an army rolling for the Rhine. The German field force that served the A4 remains professional, even graceful in routine. The routine is no longer enough. In staff rooms, Allied officers begin to write the first clean sentences that will later appear in campaign summaries. Crossbow air operations did not intercept missiles in flight. They forced longer, riskier setups and hammered parks, convoys, and road nodes. Photo interpretation at RAF Medmenham translated scorch marks and heat stains into folders that made belts into target systems. The XX Committee's double agent work and controlled publication starved German aim of the truth it needed to refine. Antwerp and London absorbed tragic loss, while the mechanics of dispersal, redundancy, and rapid repair erased the strategic leverage Berlin promised. None of the sentences is dramatic, all of them are exact. Late April, The Hague. A patrol steps through a barn that smells of oxidizer and wet straw. A stencil board lies face down in muck. A young sapper flips it and reads the ghost of a designation. He does not know that the same designation was chalked on a board in Antwerp months ago as a problem to be scheduled around. He only knows the barn is cold now. On a nearby road, a canvas-wrapped shaft lies in a ditch half burned. A photograph will be taken, filed, and forgotten beneath larger headlines. May will close the ledger. German forces in the Netherlands surrender in the first week. The belts go quiet. Antwerp keeps time until the war runs out of days. When the last tallies are added, civilians in Britain and Belgium have paid a severe price. The factories, rails, and quay cranes the rockets were meant to silence did not. The missile that should have imposed paralysis ran into an opponent that refused to be a single target and refused to present a single schedule. A4 crews did their work well. Allied systems did their work better. The lesson is not a slogan. It sits in a yard office, on a chalkboard with 3 columns, and in a photo lab where a stereo viewer made tree lines lift in 3D, and in a locked room where a committee trimmed words to bend a mirror. A supersonic ballistic arc could not be stopped in air. Its routine could be hunted. Its sight picture could be fogged. Its results could be absorbed by a web built of many small answers. In that quiet calculus, the V-2 campaign failed to do what its staff papers said it would do. Firma 1945, Lüneburg, Heath, Germany. Under a low ceiling that presses sound flat, General Admiral Hans-Georg von Friedeberg signs the instrument that surrenders German forces in the Netherlands, Northwest Germany, and Denmark to Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. The paper is spare. The faces are spare. A signals officer at a nearby table rolls the copy through a transmitter that will push the words across a net of field lines and staff rooms. In Antwerp, the message will arrive as a sentence in a morning brief, pinned between 2 columns of figures that have mattered more than speeches for months. 5. May Wageningen, Netherlands. A Dutch crowd gathers tight along a street where Canadian officers meet their German counterparts to transmit the local terms. The air smells of wet brick and sap. A young engineer corporal who crossed polders, hunting the routine that moved Mielerwagen convoys, stares at a doorway where a launch troop officer once waited out a raid, eyes measuring minutes, not ideals. The officer is not here. He is somewhere east, going through the slow ritual of being disarmed, logged, and sent to a cage. The corporal writes a line in his notebook, belts empty papers, seized roads passable. His pen stops over the word belts, then moves on. The word is already becoming past tense. Antwerp dawned the same day. The port sounds like every morning since November. Cranes start their swing. Tugs push a freighter onto a berth whose number has changed 3 times since winter to deny pattern. Movement control flips the chalkboard from now to next to elsewhere and back again, not because rockets will come tonight, but because the habit is the armor that got them here. AUS. Army Transportation Corps captain checks a string of boxcars while a Belgian yardmaster blows into his hands and laughs that he will miss the noise he swore he hated. A Royal Engineers lieutenant initials a panel lay across a scar that will be properly rebuilt next week. The figures on the wall say what they have said since December: trains per day, tons per hour. The numbers have the quiet pride of a city that refused to be one target. In London, the XX committee meets in a room that smells of paper and cold tea. A clerk boxes files, whose code names once moved like whispers through safe houses and field posts. The morning traffic includes a last clipped note from a controlled agent about a blast that fell east of docks on a night now in the past. The committee chair reads, nods, and writes final in the margin. A staff officer from Air Defense of Great Britain brings in the map board with the pins that have marked fall of shot across months. The final dot sits alone at 27 March 1945. There is no ribbon. There is only the weight of what did not happen after that date. Medmenham, late afternoon. A photo interpreter walks past the wall that for months held arrows pointing from scorch ellipses to road spurs and suburban copses. The new sorties show fewer wheel marks, more orderly rows of abandoned stores. A shed that once hid vented heat now holds only straw and a bent stencil. The interpreter pulls the stereo viewer over one last pair and rocks the image as he has 1,000 times. Nothing lifts from the canopy. He writes, negative scorch suspected evacuation, no further activity. The folder goes into a stack that will drift toward history shelves. The room hums with the sound of a system easing down without a click. 6. May the Hague. A launch crew sergeant stands in a line that inches toward a card table where a British captain and a Dutch officer record names, units, and equipment surrendered or destroyed. The sergeant answers questions with the calm of a professional whose routine carried him farther than promises. When asked about Antwerp, he nods, says that aim was improved, that reports were encouraging, that results should have followed. He does not add what he saw. After every shot, the same clock, the same hurried road, back to a barn that moved 3 times in a week, the same fuel bowser lost to a fighter bomber that found them on a canal bend. He signs his name. The captain signs the card. The line moves. Antwerp evening. A ship slides off the quay stern wash, slapping a wall patched with bright mortar. A crane cab carries a spare pane bolted on the rack because the list says to carry it. The yard office chalkboard keeps its 3 columns. The habit no longer answers a supersonic threat, but it answers something deeper, the knowledge that a web wins where a node fails. In a back room, a Belgian clerk folds a sheet that totals civilian dead into a ledger that totals rail cuts and repaired spurs. The numbers sit together because they belong together. The port has always understood that its victory was not bloodless. It was procedural. 8. May 1945. London. News spreads that all German forces have capitulated. Church bells answer radio sets. A WAF plotter, who months ago pushed pins across a board for Big Ben, stands outside and listens to a city that has learned to celebrate without sirens. She remembers the first day, without a pin, then the first week, then the way caution slowly admitted the word last. She walks back inside and helps take down a strip map that will never again see a new dot. Post-war week's Antwerp. Investigators walk belts that feel like the edge of a stage after the show has closed. They find vent panels, stencil boards, gyro scribbles in a notebook left in a pocket, fuel drums scorched and empty. They take photographs that will be pasted into reports that will draw quiet conclusions. Crossbow forced longer, riskier setups. Photo interpretation made belts into target systems. Double agent work and controlled publicity denied aim correction. The port treated every day as the day after and beat a supersonic weapon with ledger lines. None of the sentences reads like a poster. All of them read like the truth the docs lived. The calculus ends where it began, with a routine on one side and a routine on the other. The A4 leapt beyond interception and promised paralysis. Antwerp spread, its weight widened its aisles, shortened its dwell, drilled alternates, and refused to hold still long enough to be broken. The missiles spoke in shock. The port replied in time.